You came here for the image, the man screaming, melting alive, in front of a laughing crowd. But what if I told you the real horror wasn't the boiling? It was why the king demanded it, and what the victim confessed before he died. The tavern smelled of sweat, grease, and secrets. Beneath its low-beamed ceiling where the candles bled more smoke than light, nobles and scullions mingled in shadows. Gossip here wasn't idle, it was currency. And tonight the air was thick with whispers about the Duke of Arles, his sudden sickness, his pale lips, his cup left half drained. In the corner, hunched beneath his hood, sat a man they all ignored. He had no title, no ring, just the scent of burnt herbs lingering on his cloak and the calloused hands of someone used to fire. His name wasn't important, not to them, but it would be soon, because he wasn't just a cook, he wasn't just an apothecary, he was something in between, someone who heard things no one else did, someone who listened too closely to doors that should have stayed shut. He had prepared the Duke's meat the night before. He had seasoned it with the king's own spice, sent from the southern ports, laced with saffron, honey, and something darker. He had seen the prince in the kitchens after midnight, speaking with urgency, voice low and bitter. He had watched the cupbearer twitch when asked about the wine, and then, hours later, the Duke was dead. Skin gray, mouth foaming, veins blackened, poison, they all said. Sorcery, some whispered, but no one asked who had poured the wine. No one asked who had stood beside the Duke's table before the meal. They only asked one question: who would pay for this? By dawn the answer was chosen. He was taken without ceremony. 3 guards, a knock, no warning. They dragged him from his stool, through the mud-soaked streets, past shuttered windows that dared not open. No charge was read. No priest summoned, just the sound of chains clinking against cobblestone and the steady beat of marching boots toward the castle gates. In the cells beneath the palace, the torches flickered like nervous eyes. Stone walls breathed cold. The jailer didn't speak. The hooded man said nothing either, not until they passed the chapel where a priest reached out offering last rites through the bars. He refused them. "I've done no wrong," he said, "and the king knows it." The priest's face paled and the guards quickened their pace. Word spread like fire through the court. "The cook has been caught," he confessed. He cursed the Duke's soul before boiling his broth. Of course, none of it was true. But truth was too small to satisfy the hunger of a grieving king, or perhaps a frightened one, because some remembered what the man had been overheard saying in the kitchens. Something about the prince, something about the well. What well they didn't know, but it was enough. That evening, a single candle flickered in the king's private chamber. The fire had burned low, casting the room in trembling shadows. Across the table a page knelt, holding a letter in trembling hands. The king read it once, twice, then without a word dropped it into the flame. It hissed, crumpled, died. Only the final words were visible before the parchment curled into ash. "He knows about the well." Outside, the cauldron was already being prepared. They built the cauldron in silence. At the center of the square, black iron was hauled into place by 12 men, each refusing to look directly at it. It groaned as it settled, massive enough to hold a man whole. The king had it forged from cannons, not for practicality, but for message. This wasn't just an execution, it was a warning. A ritual, a sermon preached in fire. By dawn, the scaffold was ringed with soldiers, muskets ready, sabers drawn, though no one expected resistance. The threat wasn't outside the square, it was inside the flesh of the condemned. Crowds poured in from every corner of the kingdom. Farmers, nobles, widows in black lace, children perched on rooftops, priests whispered behind their sleeves. There were no town criers today. The news had spread like rot. The man who poisoned the Duke is to be boiled alive. And not in secret. The king would appear himself, it was said. And when kings come to watch death, the people follow. The fire beneath the cauldron had been lit hours before. Flames licked up the sides like hungry tongues. The water inside, mixed with pitch and oil, began to bubble, not in rage but in anticipation. The scent was already unbearable. Smoke, iron, and something sweet that didn't belong. Then the gates opened. The condemned was dragged forward, wrists in iron, head shaved. His body was barely human anymore. Emaciated, blistered, lips cracked like broken parchment. His eyes, though, they were still awake. He saw the crowd. He saw the priests. He saw the king, seated beneath a red canopy, face veiled in shadow. A hush fell like snow. The priest stepped forward first. He begged the king to allow confession, to spare the man his soul if not his life. But the king only raised his hand. One gesture, no words. The priest was pulled back. The king would allow no absolution. Not for this. Then came the reading of the sentence. for poisoning a nobleman of the blood, for tampering with sacred food and drink, for conspiring with forces unnatural. Let this man be put to the cauldron until death claims him." The cook didn't weep, he didn't scream, he merely stood, swaying as two guards began to strip him. His flesh was mottled with bruises, the brand of the dungeon visible on his chest. He whispered something too soft to hear, a prayer perhaps, or a curse. Then he lifted his eyes and looked directly at the king. "I didn't kill the duke," he said, voice hoarse but clear. "I only cooked his meat." The king said nothing, but a ripple moved through his shoulders, a stiffness, like stone cracking beneath weight. He nodded once, a single gesture. "Begin." The guards grabbed him, dragged him to the rim. Steam coiled around them like ghosts. The cook resisted, not wildly, but weakly, instinct more than protest. His foot slipped on the wet plank. The iron handles were hot to the touch. He was shoved forward, knees slamming into the rim. His scream echoed off the cathedral walls. Then the descent. His legs were first. Flesh met boil with a sound like a scream made of meat. Skin peeled instantly. Blisters erupted, then burst. He thrashed, arms flailing, trying to claw back, but they held him fast. The crowd gasped, not in sympathy but in awe. Some turned away, others leaned in. The bubbling grew louder, as if the water had waited for this. The smell, burnt hair, seared skin, oiled blood became unbearable. Still he lived, up to his waist now. The guards let go. He tried to pull himself free, his hands slick, the rim too hot to grasp. He looked up, not at the crowd, not at the guards, but at the king. And then, just before his torso vanished into the foam, he screamed a word, one word: "Bastard." The king's face did not move, but the square trembled. A child in the front row fainted. An old woman cackled, lifting her hands as if in prayer. One nobleman vomited into his sleeve. The cook's scream continued, long after his body disappeared beneath the surface, long after he should have gone still. Some said the water never stopped moving, never stopped thrashing, and when silence finally came, it was not peace, it was terror, because something had gone wrong. This wasn't justice, it wasn't even vengeance, it was theater, carefully choreographed. But the script had unraveled. The actor had said a line that wasn't in the play, and now the crowd didn't know whether they had witnessed a cleansing or a confession. It should have ended in smoke, but the fire left more behind than ashes. By morning the cauldron was cold, the square scrubbed clean, and the king's crimson pavilion dismantled like a traveling circus. But something in Paris had shifted, a chill that crept beneath doors, into parlors and kitchens, into the mouths of midwives and magistrates. They whispered not about the flames but about the word that had sliced through the air like a blade just before the man boiled: "Bastard." It echoed days after, through alleys, into courtrooms, and even in the royal nursery, where the prince sat quietly by the window, no longer asking to play. The palace pretended it had never happened. The king issued no further statement. No trial record was ever sealed because none was ever written. And yet beneath the marble and incense, doubt began to rot. A courtier, young and drunk, made the mistake of asking aloud, "Why boil a man for poisoning a duke, when the duke's heir inherits so much more?" He vanished within the week. Still, fragments of truth clawed their way up. A maidservant dismissed the day after the execution, spoke to a friar before disappearing into the countryside. She said the cook never served the Duke of Arles. His orders came from the prince's chamber. She remembered bringing meals in the night, strange requests, heavy spices, something metallic, and always that lingering scent of bitter almonds. The cook, it seemed, was never the duke's man at all. He was the prince's. That same week, in a side room of the palace chapel, a scribe sweeping the floor kicked something lodged beneath a flagstone, a scrap of parchment, scorched at the edges, crumbling at the corners. Most of it had burned away, but two words remained: "Flesh merchant." The priest who found it turned pale. He sealed the fragment in a reliquary and never spoke of it again. What did it mean? Some thought it referred to black alchemy, whispered practices where bodies were harvested for vitality, or blood exchanged to prolong life. Others believed it was code, a reference to something more political, more carnal. Rumors sparked about the prince's appetites, lovers silenced, servants relocated, and one boy, a page with bright eyes and a clubbed foot, who disappeared the night of the duke's death, never to be seen again. A former guard, years later, would swear under confession that he'd seen the prince at the boiling, not seated, not guarded, but in the shadows behind the cauldron, weeping, but not for the dead, for the condemned. The king, of course, denied everything. The man boiled, he declared, was a traitor, a murderer, a danger to the crown and to God. But curiously, No records could be found of his employment. His name was stricken from the kitchen logs. His family, if they had one, never came forward, as if he had never existed, and the cauldron melted down the very next day, not cleaned, not stored, destroyed, as if it too had seen too much. The crowd who had gathered to watch the boiling now murmured only in passing. No songs were sung about it, no tales etched into woodcuts or ballads. The silence around the act grew louder than the act itself. But secrets don't stay buried in castles, they leak like rot, because one winter, nearly 2 decades later, a bishop overseeing repairs to the royal crypt found something beneath the stone floor. The tomb was meant for the Duke of Arles, interred with full rites. But there was something else in the burial chamber, something that shouldn't have been there. A second jawbone, cracked, burned. The bishop, confused, had it examined in secret. The bone didn't match the Duke. It was too old, too damaged. And then came the strangest part, signs of boiling. The bone was porous, fragmented, as though it had been exposed to intense heat from within and without. But how had it ended up in the royal crypt, and why had someone tried to hide it? The bishop wrote his findings in a letter to the Vatican, but the dispatch was intercepted. He was reassigned within the month, to a monastery far from France, where he died 2 years later, mute and blind. Back in the capital, a new rumor began, quieter this time, more cautious, that the man who boiled hadn't just died for poison, he had died protecting someone, and that someone still wore a crown. They said the scent never left, not after the execution, not after the cauldron was melted, not even after the square was scrubbed clean with vinegar and holy water. Decades passed, kings came and went, but in the far corners of the old kitchens, behind the walled-off hearths, and beneath the bricked-over floors, people whispered that the smell still lingered, the sour reek of burning flesh, oil, and something else, something sickly sweet, like overripe fruit rotting beneath the summer sun. The rumors began as ghost stories. Workers in the palace kitchens claimed to hear bubbling in the walls, soft at first, then louder, rhythmic, like someone stirring stew from the other side of the stone. Others reported seeing steam pooling at their feet, even on cold days, even with the fires out. One scullery maid swore she saw a pale hand reach from the oven grate, blistered and boneless. She quit that same night, and never spoke again. By then the king who had ordered the boiling was dead, but his death was far from peaceful. They found him in his bed, twisted, drenched in sweat, eyes wide open and locked on the ceiling. The doctors called it fever, the priests called it penance, the servants called it something else, echo. One chamberlain claimed the king had screamed in his final hours, not from pain, but from memory, screaming the cook's name though no one remembered it, screaming about a face that would not sink. His skin, they whispered, had begun to blister days before his death. No wound, no infection, just heat. From within, it was never recorded. The royal physicians buried the symptoms under layers of Latin euphemism, but the nurse who cleaned the body swore under oath that she smelled the cauldron when she touched him, and that the room was cold, colder than a tomb. Years later, a stranger arrived at the court gates, a gray-bearded man in a weather-worn cloak, clutching a leather-bound journal tight to his chest. He claimed to be the son of the man who boiled. No one believed him. He had no papers, no coin, only words. But what he carried, that changed everything. The journal. Its pages were cracked with age, stained with soot and fat. But the writing was clear, small, slanted, meticulous, and it told a story no one was prepared to hear. His father hadn't poisoned the Duke. He hadn't even cooked for him. He had served only the prince, the same prince who had vanished into diplomatic exile 2 months after the execution, sent away, they said, to cure an illness. But the journal told of something deeper, of a conspiracy inside the palace, of forbidden desires, of knowledge too dangerous for a common man to possess. The cook had been silenced, not for what he did, but for what he saw, and what he refused to become part of. The boiling had been theater, the death, a distraction. The real crime still lived, in the bloodline, in the palace, in the very walls that groaned and whispered when the moon was full. The court never acknowledged the journal. The old man disappeared within weeks. Some said he died in the street, others that he was taken. But the rumors could not be strangled. They slipped through cracks like smoke. They said the curse of the boiling had not ended, that it had infected the royal house, not as a ghost but as a stain, a sickness that passed from father to son. One prince grew violently mad by the age of 20. Another was found in his bath, skin scaled and cracked as if scalded. In portraits painted after the boiling, subtle signs appear, faint red patches at the wrists, a shadow beneath the eye, a reluctance to touch flame. One painter commissioned for the king's deathbed image reportedly fled his post halfway through. He claimed he saw something behind the dying monarch's reflection, something boiling. In time, the palace kitchens were relocated, the old hearths sealed, walls bricked shut. But some say, late at night, in the deepest hours when even the guards fall still, the bubbling begins again, soft, slow, steady, like something cooking or someone trying to rise. And then there was the final portrait, hung briefly in the great hall before it was removed, burned and never seen again. It depicted the old king, moments before death, eyes wide, mouth parted, and on his pale, clammy skin, faint blisters, like something under the surface had finally boiled through.